Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show, brought to you by the world's famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Waddell, a.k.a. Dub Deuces 85, a.k.a. Niche Sports Connoisseur, a.k.a. Mr. Leverage, Captain Leverage, a.k.a. whatever you want to call me. We are here in week 3, technically through the 3 weeks of the season with week 0, week 1, and week 2 in the books. We are going to be breaking down week 3 from a DraftKings main slate perspective. Those of you that play FanDuel, have no fear. I am also going to talk a little bit about the FanDuel slate, give you guys a core for both sites at the end of the show, talk PrizePicks, talk betting stuff, go through and give you a full first look at the slate that you'll be able to kind of watch the show over the next couple of days. And then we'll rehash, of course, Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock with the Q&A show, myself rolling solo for that one. Breaking down any late news, last minute thoughts on the slate, and getting you ready for that actual lock. So a lot going on. I'm going to bring my partner, co-host, co-pilot, Jake Kuchek, my Bay Area brother. How are you, Jake?
What's going on, man? Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Before we get into the slate here, I just want to, kind of recap a little bit last week. It seems we're having some success. Week 0 is awesome. The weekday slates have been good, but the week 1, week 2, at least for me, main slates have gone a little bit sideways. I've had injuries galore, and also just variance wise because of blowouts has caused a little bit of wonkiness. But how did you feel like last week went for you overall?
Yeah, it was a little bit of nostalgia. I don't know if you recall, maybe I'm not sure if it was last year or the year before. There was a game that we were super pumped for, the Devon A-Chain show. I think it had to have been last year because that's what it was like. They were turning the rock over to him, and he was going to be the guy. And then that game got delayed by lightning or something crazy, and there was like a 4-hour delay. And we're like, well, maybe the game comes back on and he just goes nuts in the second half. But he'd had like 2 yards of carry up until then, and it felt like the entire day was like that. Like it was like, there's these underwhelming performances coupled by weather exacerbated by weather delays. And it was just like a long slog of a main slate. It wasn't my most profitable slate. I did, however, have a lot of the Oregon Texas Tech game on the evening slate, not the late, but the 7 p.m. Eastern start, and that was a particularly profitable slate. Did pretty well there. Had a lot of Tyler Shuck and Durant Bradley on one side with Bo Nix and a couple of his receivers on game stacks, and so it was like that just kind of made up for everything. All of the I guess underwhelming nature of the main was able to make it up. So, let that be a word of the wise. You're not dead yet if the main slate doesn't start exactly as you want it to.
Yeah, and it wasn't even really that we did bad. Like I got away from a lot of what I deemed to be pretty horrific chalk. Jeff Sims from Nebraska. I kept telling people like, yeah, the matchup's nice, but Jeff Sims is Jeff Sims' own worst enemy. Like I kept saying that in the Discord as he was fumbling and throwing interceptions, and he didn't play very well. So we got away from a very high-owned piece of chalk there. Xavier Weaver was the Colorado receiver that we liked. He was the lower owned of the 3. He ended up being the best. Obviously Pratt injuries that threw a wrench in some stuff. I was very high on Allie Jennings from Virginia Tech. He got injured. Grant Wells' game kept getting weather delays. The one game that we had mentioned, that were kind of like, hey, there might be weather in Miami, Texas A&M. There was no problem. That ended up being a shootout. So if you
was
had
the one to
that
stack.
game, if you had any of that game, you went nuts. One of our subs actually did stack that game in a GPP and won quite a bit of money actually. But yeah, it was a really weird slate, and I felt pretty good about the fact that we were able to stay away from what I deemed to be some bad chalk. So something to pat ourselves on the back and feel at least somewhat good about. But this is generally around the time, week 3, week 4, when we start kind of zoning in. We get into some more competitive games and we turn things around and start hitting the ground running. So I'm feeling pretty positive about where we're headed here. We'll jump right into the main slate here and start things off with a team that, teams that feel like maybe they're going in opposite directions. But Florida State, who has a very, very good quarterback who for a couple seasons now has kind of trended upwards towards being a viable fantasy option because of his legs. But now he's got receivers and he can actually throw the ball going up against a team in BC that just kind of looks dead to me. But maybe they'll turn things around and score some points here. There's a 48-50 total, so maybe they'll score. I don't know. But what do you think about this FSU BC game?
Yeah, man. So it's one of a number of games that it's just kind of like you'd hope that we would get through the easy steamroll type of games being the majority of the games on the main slate, and this is yet another one where we're starting the slate off with like a 27 or 28 point spreads. Not exactly where you want to go. But I still think there can be some useful pieces from it, mainly on the Florida State side, of course. We haven't really seen much in terms of an effective offense on BC. I mean, I guess you could say that they're trying to. I mean, they're getting Ryan O'Keefe the volume. I will say that they are targeting him a lot. They are getting him involved, and he's not been as effective as Zay Flowers was in that offense. He's probably not as good as Zay Flowers, and they don't have the same kind of quarterback play that they had when they had Zay Flowers. But the majority of my interest is going to lie on the Florida State side. I don't know that I want to get to Jordan Travis as like the literal most expensive player on the slate in a blowout game that they probably are going to take the foot off the gas fairly early on. He had an amazing game against LSU. I don't know that I expected him to be able to be as effective through the air. I mean, almost 350 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air, in addition to what we know Jordan Travis can do with his legs. Like I think that's pretty close to a Jordan Travis ceiling, in terms of what can expect. And that's a great game. That's a great game at any price. I just don't think that we're going to need that from him, and especially not with his legs in a matchup like this. But, conference play, you could see some weird stuff happen. It is FSU traveling. This could be kind of a look ahead spot for them. And maybe the game stays a little bit more competitive for a little bit longer, but I don't think that that's going to be the case because BC just puts up a ton of points and is able to keep up. I think that if it stays competitive, it's going to be that FSU falls kind of flat and comes out a little bit flat and doesn't put up as many points as we would expect them to. In which case, I don't know that Jordan Travis at 9.7 is going to get there. I am a little bit more interested in the running back room. Obviously, Benson no-showed on us against LSU, probably because all of the touchdown glory for the most part went to Jordan Travis, but came back in a big way, extremely efficient outing against a well overmatched Southern Miss squad, putting up 3 touchdowns on only 9 carries. So that's an insane touchdown rate. Probably not going to be sustainable there. But at 6,600, I could see him being the glory hog, if you will. And if they do score early, being very much involved in that. We haven't seen Toafili vulture touchdowns in the same way this year that he has in the past, but we know that that's possible. We know that could be coming. And so just be cognizant of that. If you see Benson break off like a 20-yard run and then a 45-yard run, and then they're like inside the 10 and Toafili topples over into the end zone for a couple yards, that's very much an outcome that's possible. So we're going to want to be cognizant of that. Probably not getting to him at 5,700. If I'm going to do a back, I'm probably going to hope that Benson gets all the glory and go that direction. And if you do want to use the receiving game, if we think the game stays close enough for them to be passing, or if we think that Keon Coleman is just so amazing and will put up so much in terms of volume in the first half before the game really gets out of hand, I can't really blame you for that, because I mean he was bonkers good against LSU in a more competitive matchup, and didn't really need him so much against Southern Miss, and had light volume but still scored a touchdown. And I think is probably not priced where he needs to be priced for the level of talent and production that he's shown thus far. So that's a pretty good price on Keon Coleman. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be chalk because people are going to see that spread and not necessarily dive full-fledged into the passing game. But I will say, if you use Jordan Travis, you probably are going to want to stack him up with Keon Coleman despite his rushing ability, because that is very much his go-to guy, along with Johnny Wilson when Johnny Wilson's healthy. Looks like we may get Johnny Wilson back for this one, in which case some of that luster comes off Keon Coleman, but I'm still pretty interested, just based on the talent that he's shown and the production he's been able to put up thus far. And I don't really see anyone on BC slowing him down.
Yeah, Keon Coleman is awesome. We have loved him since last year when he put the hurt on my Huskies, and 6'5" is way too cheap, like you said. There is the possibility, and the weather's crazy right now. What is it? Hurricane Lee from Canada to Maine. So maybe BC gets hit by some strong winds and other stuff. So there could be an angle there to avoid the passing game, or everybody thinks that's going to happen. Then yeah, maybe we get Keon Coleman at sub 10%, which in that case I am fairly interested in. And I am waiting to see, the Trey Benson explosion game here coming soon. He's been hyped so much with Treshaun Ward gone. So this would be the spot for that to possibly happen. So I'm in agreement there with you. I think Coleman is a good GPP look. All right, moving on to the next game here, Penn State versus the Illini. I don't know. I'm a big Penn State fan, at least from DFS standpoint. I was all over the Valu train. I know he's over in Pittsburgh now. But you have to love Drew Aller, man. That kid is he's really, really good. Penn State offense under him looks so much more dangerous, I had to say. It wasn't that they weren't good under Sean Clifford. They were just really safe under him. They didn't make a lot of, big plays. They were running the football. Clifford could certainly do that. But with Aller, it's like that whole new angle and element to the game just makes them so much dangerous. And the fact that they have such a world-class group of running backs that the defense, they really can't, sell out to stop the pass. They got to be cognizant of the run, or they sell out to stop the run, which allows Aller to just pick them apart. So I'm a really big fan of Aller here. I think he's priced in a spot where most people probably will look towards some of the other options. Like I could see Travis absolutely getting some ownership, even though I think you're right. He's a little bit spendy there for that, weather, possible blowout, all that stuff. 7.9 for Aller, I think, is just a price point that maybe people are going to gloss over, similar to that Will Howard price point last week. He was about 8.5, and of course he ended up being one of the higher scoring quarterbacks. So I like Aller in that regard. Super young still, has a kind of a revamped receiver room, has a little bit of rushing upside. Really, against West Virginia, just picked them apart. 325 yards, 3 touchdowns. Showed a little bit of that rushing upside that he has against Delaware last week. Obviously didn't have to throw the ball very much in a blowout win there. So I like this more competitive game. The Illini haven't particularly looked very good, but it's a road game for Penn State. Aller being a young quarterback, maybe he gets rattled a little bit as be the angle that some people play, but I think he's going to have the opportunity to throw 30 plus times here, even with the running game as strong as it is. So I do like him a lot at 7.9. If I'm not going there, I'm absolutely playing one of the running backs, even on the road. The Illini's defense so far in terms of rush defense has been awful. They are just getting pelted. And it's only been 2 games, and I get it, but this is what we have to go on. And you're looking at a group that's given up 220 yards per game on the ground through those 2 games. I don't think that that's going to improve. They're probably going to be giving up around that mark for the rest of the season. Singleton so far, 25 carries, 117 yards, 4 touchdowns. So the touchdown equity certainly sits with Singleton at the moment. But Katron Allen, 29 carries, so 4 more for 154 yards and 1 touchdown. He's been able to break off some bigger runs, even though Singleton kind of feels like he has that home run hitting ability. Katron also has that home run hitting ability, and both of them are very solid options. Singleton, a little more expensive, does have that touchdown equity, as I said, but I've liked the upside for like 100 plus and a score for Katron as well for a little bit less. You look at the carry percentage, they're super close. Allen has 32% of the carries, 27% for Singleton. So true blue duo here. They're both, sharing the workload. Both can pay off, but that 5.5 price for Allen, I lean there just a little bit for that discount in case I want to pay up for somebody at quarterback or a more expensive wide receiver. Perhaps I get that discount if I want it. So that's kind of where my head is at there. I think Illinois is going to be one of those early DVP spots for us that we're just going to be using running backs against them often. At wide receiver for Penn State, Keandre Lambert-Smith, he's emerged as the go-to guy. This program's had Jahan Dotson, Parker Washington. Last year we had Malachi Corley floating around. So some really high quality, high targeted, high volume receivers for DFS purposes. Looks like Keandre is going to be that guy. And he got the chance to play, the WR3, WR4 spot behind a lot of those guys. So far leads the team in targets with 12, 10 catches, 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So he's very solid if you're looking to go a little contrarian. Let's say those running backs for Penn State end up being chalkier by the time Saturday gets, and I do think that they might be. You have that chance to go with Aller and Lambert-Smith. They throw some touchdowns instead. Maybe Singleton rushes for 60 yards, no touchdowns. You'll be well ahead of the field in that case if those two go off. Other targets, Harrison Wallace, who has 10 catches for 98 yards. Malik McLean, 5 catches for 65 yards. And their tight end, Tyler Warren, 7 catches on 8 targets for 50 yards. Tight ends in this offense, they typically, I should say, score touchdowns in this offense. Tyler Warren, one of those like GPP looks perhaps as we start to get further into the season. On the Illinois side, I think the Penn State defense deserves to be respected to the point where I'm not looking to use a guy like Luke Altmaier against them. I thought Altmaier would be more of a adequate fantasy option faster this season. He's only 6'2", but I'm really not that interested against the Penn State defense, even though they'll be at home. As far as the running game goes, Josh McCray and Reggie Love are basically an even split. Penn State is giving up less than 250 yards per game to the offense and total, 110 through the air and less than 120 on the ground. So good luck to those guys. I don't know that they're going to find much success. Where you want to look for Illinois, if you're looking to use anyone, would be Juice Williams, Isaiah Juice Williams. We've got 2 Juice on this roster or this slate, by the way. 16 targets leads the team, 11 catches, 150 yards, and a touchdown. They scheme to get him the ball, however. He'll get carries, short slants, all kinds of different routes. So I don't mind using him if you're doing like a mini stack of this game, because I do think it has potential to be pretty nice for fantasy purposes, even though people are going to look elsewhere. But he's definitely somebody to consider. But I'm going to be using somebody from this game in my main lineup, probably Allen or Singleton, but I do like Drew Aller quite a bit. So I won't rule out using him just yet in the main lineup also. Do you have anything to add for that one?
I really like the Juice Williams call. Has shades of the Nick Nash call from early in the season with a team that is obviously the team that's the underdog by quite a bit, but is also the guy that team schemes to get the ball quite a bit, and when they're chasing points, that probably becomes the case even more. And whether he's getting end arounds or reverses or slants, some kind of quick pass pattern, like Juice Williams probably going to see a lot of the ball. So whether it's in a game stack or even as a one-off, I would say he's pretty viable. And then I would have liked to see Dante Cephas get more involved in the Penn State offense. Maybe that'll come later in the year, but he was a guy that we remember from action, and obviously a lot of talent hasn't translated to Penn State offense just yet, but maybe that's a shout for later in the season as some attrition happens. But yeah, Lambert, I think an Aller, Lambert, Smith, Williams kind of mini stack or whatever you want to call, a run back. I think that has a lot of potential, and you're right with a, under 50 total and 2 touchdown spread, probably not a ton of rostership on that particular build.
No, and I think people are going to be surprised, man. I don't know. It's Penn State team. I just feel like they're going to be semi-juggernaut style here in the middle part of the season, so I want to be early on them. All right, moving on, we have Georgia Southern versus Wisconsin. The Badgers, the first week they were on the main slate, I believe Braylon Allen went nuts, Malusi went nuts, and then they were on the later slate, and Braylon Allen, they had to ditch the run, and Allen just got forgotten about really, really quick. So very weird game for Wisconsin last week. Very ugly, and it reminded me a lot of last year. So I'm almost kind of gun shy about them, but it's a perfect situation here. 20-point favorites. The total is over 60 points. should score a lot. The running backs should be back in play. What do you think about Wisconsin and Georgia Southern?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously the Wisconsin side is super interesting. It comes down to how you think those points will shake out. And I think this is kind of a spot that is similar to the Kyle McCord spot from last week, where very very uncertain first performance, and a quarterback that didn't have a ton of experience in on the field at all, and then he kind of found a rhythm, and obviously has some of the best receivers in the country to throw to, and that's not necessarily the case at Wisconsin, but it is a vastly inferior opponent, and it is a home game, and I think we see things kind of come together for Tanner Mordecai in a way that they haven't previously. So he has thrown quite a bit. Like, that's the one thing that I'm bullish on, is like 31 pass attempts and 40 pass attempts. Like, yeah, it hasn't been great so far from a results standpoint, but you're talking about a new system, new players. He's a transfer himself. Everything's new. It takes a while for it to come together. And going on the road and playing a tough game in week 2 against a competitive team after not having at all a competitive game in week 1. I can see, this being the spot where everybody kind of hops off and says, oh, well, Tanner Mordecai can't hack it in the Wisconsin offense. Quarterbacks are always doomed there. Curse of Graham Mertz, whatever people want to say. And I think the complete opposite is true. I think that it's going to be the Tanner Mordecai show. I think that the running game is definitely going to get there. Like, this is Wisconsin we're talking about, but I think this is his chance to kind of show out and build some confidence before they have to really start playing people that are tough in conference. So if you agree with that rationale, that means we're going to see a lot of Will Pauling and a lot of DK. And they're both very reasonably priced in the low to mid 5s. So if you wanted to do something along the lines of, fading the run game entirely and just going with Mordecai and one or more receiver in probably game stack, if you're doing 2 receivers, not a terrible way to go. I think that the chalk play is definitely going to be to go to Allen or Malusi. Malusi priced way up, by the way. Like, I'm used to seeing, Allen's about where I would think he would be. In fact, maybe a little bit lower than where I would think he would be in this matchup. Malusi, you usually would think he's in like the low 5s or something like that, and seeing him almost clearing 7. Like, I know he's had he had that big game week 1, and saw a good amount of carries and good amount of production against Washington State, but like, he's not the same guy that Braylon Allen is, and his price differential should be more than it is. So I think Malusi is overpriced, and Braylon Allen is slightly underpriced, but I'm probably leaning towards using the passing game more than I am using even a slightly underpriced Braylon Allen, just because I think that's the way it's going to shake out. Now, on the other side, not at all interested in using if it's Davis Brin that can last a full game against a Wisconsin defense without getting injured, I'm not at all interested in using Davis Brin. Seen that story too many times. Davis Brin against good competition doesn't end well for Davis Brin. Derwin Burgess has some volume so far to start the season. I don't know that that's going to continue against Wisconsin. And maybe you have a shout. Caleb Hood's been pretty good too, but like, we're not getting the requisite discounts that I would want on receivers on a team chasing 20 plus points to use them outside of a full game stack type of scenario. Like, if these guys were all in like the low to mid 4s, then I'm starting to think about it a little bit more. But I think I'm probably going to just lean on the Wisconsin passing game with sprinkling in Braylon Allen in lineups where I do not have exposure to the Wisconsin passing game.
Yeah, I think I like that. I would expect Braylon Allen. He's been chalk on every slate. I know one was main, one was a secondary slate. Looking at 7.5, that's reasonable. They should, expect him to get back, double-digit touches and 100-plus yards, maybe multiple touchdowns. So I like that angle because I don't think a lot of people will follow you there on the passing game. And we obviously know Tanner Mordecai is capable of doing so. So I definitely like that quite a bit. That's another one for me where I might look at, some GPP exposure. The Georgia Southern side, you're right. Davis Brin, man, he's been chucking it, but obviously this is a different animal. He's going to have to throw it a lot, but that injury bug's there. But their receiver room is really, really just good. I don't know how else to say that, but there's going to be some conference slates with Georgia Southern on them, and I think we're going to be borderline stacking them. Burgess, 18 targets. Caleb Hood, 16 targets. Their tight end McAfee, 14. Anthony Quealy, who was a little used Syracuse transfer, he's got 12 targets. So they're chucking it around there. They've got a decent run game as well. But yeah, this is one of those situations I don't want to get trapped into. We see it all the time, in Austin Peay's on the slate last year and other lower tier teams who's they've got these target hound monster players, but they come up against competition that's obviously above them and they hit a brick wall. And it's we're stuck here, damn, I got a hole in my lineup here at 5'9". Burgess, 5'9's good for him on a, another conference opponent perhaps, but against Wisconsin, maybe 5'9's not as good, especially when we're looking around the slate and we see some sub 6K receivers who I probably value higher. But I certainly would like some exposure to a couple of these guys in some alt lineups. 5.3 for Hood, I think, is good because Hood has proven that he can do it against upper tier competition, but Davis Brin, it remains to be seen if he can hold up like you said there. So I like that call out, but it'll be the decision of the week for me if I want to follow Braylon Allen. I won't play him because everyone else is, but I don't know. I want to get a little bit better read there. I don't want to play him and then have a situation where Malusi gets 25 carries, Allen gets 15. I don't think that'll happen, but in the back of my mind that exists. And if Mordecai ends up slinging it, like you're saying, that's going to be even less work there for Allen, although he does catch passes. So I don't know. I'm a little leery of this Wisconsin team right now. I don't think they know what they want to be yet identity-wise. I think there's some Jekyll and Hyde stuff going on there. I'm just going to be a little bit more leery of them than other people right now. All right, going on to the next one here for me, Louisville versus Indiana. This Louisville offense, they have the ability and the personnel to be video game-esque. But Jack Plummer, man, I don't know if he's going to be that guy for us. 64% of his passes completed, which isn't horrible. He's just under 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, but he has been picked off 3 times. And a lot of those 2 of those interceptions for sure were his fault. And one was kind of like the receiver screwing around. But when he's been off and inaccurate like that first game, he's just been awful. He has rushed for about right around 60 yards. So he has that little bit of upside with his legs there. He can kind of keep the defenses guessing, but if he can't fix his accuracy issues, it's going to be really tough. Now he does have some really good weapons, and obviously Jamari Thrash, you can kind of just throw it to his vicinity and he's going to catch the ball. So at least he has that going for him. Thrash has caught 10 passes for 170 yards and 3 touchdowns on 15 targets. So he's definitely the guy here, and the main team-esque player that I think that we're going to look at. There's a ton of receivers in this price point, in this range that I think we want to use, but 5.3 for Thrash, going back to Burgess at 5.9, yeah, he's good, but we would never use him over Thrash at 5.3. So Thrash is definitely a main team play that's going to be owned by the majority of people, right? Other options here, if you want to maybe get some GPP alt type plays, Jimmy Callaway, 9 targets, Amari Huggins Bruce, 8 targets, and then Kevin Coleman, who I actually kind of like, has 7 targets. But this is obviously the Jamari Thrash show. And Plummer, he can throw as inaccurate as he's been. He can just throw it around and Thrash will go get it. The running back situation for both teams really, but Louisville especially, I'm not as excited about it as others are. Jawar Jordan sits there at 5.5, which is a decent price. Garendo, who's 4.6, just had a nice game in a blowout. Maurice Turner is there. They're all relatively cheap, but I think the touches are going to continue to be split. I guess if I had to take one, I'd say it's Jordan. And he's been chalk early in the season, and I kind of got away from him, and he scored a touchdown, and one of them was on a really big play. If you look at his total body of work, he hasn't quite been as impressive as maybe his overall raw numbers look. So I'm going to let others kind of go that direction, and in this game, just really kind of harp on the Thrash play, who I expect to be relatively highly owned because they clearly botched his price at 5.3. Indiana side, you have Taven Jackson at 7.1. He beat up on a lower tier team last week, but his numbers weren't even that impressive. He started out passing well and running, and then he kind of just let up because of the running game. We're not using him at 7.1, although I do think we'll be able to target against Louisville this year. I'm not doing it with Taven Jackson. Love the Jalen Lucas kid. I think he's one to keep our eyes on for the rest of the season. He's only 4.7. Looks like he's kind of usurped Josh Henderson as the primary first weapon there. I think he's fine for GBP, and he's catching passes, so he's good in that regard. And then at wide receiver, you have the Cam Camper, Donovan McCulley, DeQuise Carter, and Omar Cooper. Conglomerate there. Camper is the name that people know at 5K. Cooper actually leads the team in targets at 4K. But again, if I'm not using Taven Jackson, I'm not really looking at his targets. And I'm not really looking at anyone in the Indiana side. So Thrash is my guy in this game, and I'm happy to play this chalk. I'm always looking for a reason not to play highly owned guys, but I'm not looking for one not to use Thrash here. I think it's just way too easy of a play. Are you there with Thrash as well?
Thrash at 5.3 is wild. Yeah. I don't understand that. I got nothing for you. That's way too low of a price.
All right, cool.
He'll be insanely owned. I just wanted to reiterate, I'm probably a little bit higher on Lucas. I know you said you liked him. Probably a little bit higher on him for using him on this slate. He looked even though the production wasn't there, they're wanting to look to him and his kind of explosiveness against Ohio State in that game. When he actually was able to shake free. That was pretty cool, and he followed it up with a ton of production the next game. So at 4.7, I think you at least in some GPB builds should look to have some exposure there.
Yeah, I think he's going to seize that job and be like 60-70% of the carries here by season's end. All right, moving on to an SEC game between LSU and Mississippi State. This is one I think we'll see a ton of popularity for as well. LSU people are just loving Jaden Daniels, which is so weird for me because you and I would play the hell out of Jaden Daniels and our boy Rachel, if you know, on the late night slates, and nobody else would. So it's kind of weird for me to be like, wow, Jaden Daniels is 35% owned. Wow, people are rostering him in droves. This is going to be another week where I think we see a lot of Jaden Daniels ownership. So where are you at with this game, and tell us all about it?
Yeah, man. So it's interesting to see this iteration of Mississippi State that is like it's not a Mike Leach team anymore, but it still kind of feels like a Mike Leach team in terms of like there's going to be some points scored. And so the one differential that I've seen thus far is that Jaquavis Marks is not getting like eight catches a game the way that he was, but he's getting a ton of usage as an actual running back, and he's below 7K. And so and they don't really have that Dylan Johnson guy. Well, they don't have literal Dylan Johnson, but they don't have a guy in the Dylan Johnson role pilfering the 1B to Jaquavis Marks 1A. Like 43 carries over the first two games. I think Jaquavis Marks is like officially the dude now. And so it's weird to use a Mississippi State running back without like it being because he's going to get volume in the passing game, which he'll get, just not like to the degree that we expected. But man, what a weapon for him to actually be unleashed as a true running back, and at below 7K. I think I'm very much in on Jaquavis Marks in this one. On the other side, yes, Jaden Daniels is apparently amazing and potential Heisman candidate, and doesn't need Kayshon Boutte to make his season. Apparently doesn't need Malik Neighbors either, because he's had some volume so far, but it's mainly been Brian Thomas so far, and so it's interesting. Like the LSU passing game the last couple of years, it's been extremely effective, but it hasn't always been exactly who we think going off at any particular time. And so I do think it will be Jaden Daniels and a receiver having a lot of success. I'm not going to necessarily pin myself down to which guy it's going to be. I think Malik Neighbors didn't just get bad all of a sudden. I think he's plenty talented. And I think he's just getting a little bit more attention from defenses than he's used to. So if you want to go there at 7-3, at maybe a little bit lower owned than he might otherwise be, that because the production hasn't been there so far, I think that has a path to success. But I think it's also kind of a situation where you just spread your exposure with Daniels out to a number of different receivers in different lineups and run it back with Jaquavis Marks. And then on the Mississippi State side, I mean, Will Rogers has the talent. You can see a ceiling game from him from time to time. I think there are probably better options on the slate. I don't see Will Rogers running for like 100 yards and a touchdown. Not really his game to do that. And he spreads the ball out too. So it's not entirely the Griffin show. It looks like, it's possible that it may trend that way. And at least there is a little bit more of a consistency to who's seeing the volume in terms of targets so far, through 2 games. Doesn't mean a whole lot, but we're not seeing the entirely line change type offense, or at least not seeing the results of the entirely line change type offense that like we've seen. We're just basically seeing a lot of Jaquavis Marks. And so if you want to fully game stack with like a Jaden Daniels and, an LSU receiver as well as Marks and one Mississippi State receiver, it probably is going to be Griffin, and it's doable at that price. 5,700, not a ton. Even though the rest of the guys in that stack are probably going to be pretty expensive. So if you're fully game stacking, I kind of see the move happening, but I would be okay running it back with just Marks on the Mississippi State side and limiting my exposure to the passing game on the LSU side and the running game on the Mississippi State side.
Yeah, it feels like it's been so long since we had a Mississippi State back that we could actually, feel good about not having to share touches. And if, 2 years ago or even last year, if you said, hey, in 2023, you're going to pay 6-8 and probably end up paying over $7K for Joe Marks, I'd have been like, good luck with that. But yeah, he's getting super volume. Dylan Johnson is already almost out of the rotation in Washington, has some injury, some other stuff going on. But yeah, Joe Marks, man, I think he's been being held back for a while, and he's just really good. We know he can catch passes out of the backfield, and if he's getting this kind of volume, he's absolutely worth, paying that price for, which I never would have thought. And it is worth noting that show favorite Jaden Walley's still around. Feels like he's been in college forever. He's 4.3, not getting the targets yet. I thought he was going to be a hell of a lot better at this point of his career, but Jaden Walley is still hovering around. Don't be surprised if he has a multi-touchdown game this year from nowhere. All right, moving on. Kansas State versus Missouri. You have a close spread here, 3.5 points, a decent total enough. And you have that guy again, Will Howard. And I feel like I could just rewind myself for last week. And hopefully, this time I don't watch him put up a 30 plus and be like, damn it, I should have just played him. The quarterback pool is a little bit better this week than it was last week. At least I think so. And Will Howard was just ended up being the guy we should have played. He's 8.2. He's going to continue to be overlooked once again. And I was really kicking myself I ended up getting to Grant Wells because of the Pratt situation. It was a total disaster. Should have just found the money for Howard. But he's just one of those like safer, high floor guys, Kansas State quarterbacks who just produces. 547 passing yards already, damn near a 70% completion rate, and 8 total touchdowns, 5 passing and 3 rushing. Isn't going to rack up the rushing yards, but when they're in the red zone goal line area, Will Howard's calling his own number, and he's going to score. And he's just like one of those CFL quarterbacks. When they get into that like 2 to 3 yard line, you just know they're punching it in. And that's how I kind of feel with Will Howard. So it keeps his floor super high, and he's got the weapons in the receiving room that are adequate enough to where he can sling it a little bit. And I think we'll see that here against Missouri. I'm more excited about if I were to use anyone here. I think people will continue to try to gravitate towards the running game, which has been fine. but Howard and his receivers, just to me, they represent more appealing fantasy options. Yeah, I have DJ Giddings there at running back. The more, as I said, the Deuce Vaughn-esque option, no touchdowns yet, but 180 rush. And then you have Treshaun Ward, who has got one score for 114 yards, pretty much a split there. Giddens playing a little bit more snaps, but I'm just not really looking to use them just yet. I was pretty high on Giddens right away at week 1, but I haven't found myself getting back there. And Giddens did have some ownership last week for what it's worth. Receiver-wise, Phillip Brooks started hot. It looks like he's going to be, kind of Will Howard's go-to guy. 13 catches, 134 yards, and a touchdown. 16 targets. RJ Garcia is second with 15 targets, 8 catches, 142 yards, and a touchdown. You have their tight end, who you mentioned last week, Ben Sano, 9 targets, 6 catches, and 101 yards. And then Jaden Jackson, who looked pretty damn good last week as well, caught all 6 of his targets in the first 2 games, 2 touchdowns on those 6 targets, and 115 yards. Don't mind that. I think Howard is as naked as a main team play at 8-2. I just don't think people are going to look there. You're going to have those busts. You're going to have those underperformances. You're going to have those ceiling games. But with Howard, I just think he's going to keep churning out 25 to 30 fantasy points. And it might not always be that high end 30. There might be times he turns in 20 to 22, but I feel like he's a more electric version of Sean Clifford. And we know Sean Clifford's not electric at all, but he was the guy you could pretty much rely on to give you a high floor. You needed a quarterback that was going to get you points and not hurt your lineup. That's kind of how I feel about Will Howard. And I think that he's going to continue to go overlooked by the masses. So he's firmly in my player pool for sure. Missouri side, Brady Cook is a no. The running game is probably a no too. It does look like Cody Schrader is starting to pull away. 41 carries to Nathaniel Pete's 22, which accounts for 51% of the carry share. He does have 220 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Pete has 103 yards and a touchdown. He did have 14 carries in week 1, but I think he had like less than 8 in the last game. So depending on how that goes, Pete's kind of more of a pass catcher sometimes anyways. So Schrader, I think, will end up being the guy and have decent games. But I think if you want to use anyone from Missouri, it's our guy, Luther Burden, who after a much hyped freshman season, which wasn't bad, definitely productive for a freshman, over 500 yards, bunch of receptions, has really started hot. 18 targets to the first couple games, 15 catches, 210 yards, and a touchdown. Burden is clearly another guy that I'm feeling really positive about. As far as like the Jamari Thrash price, this price isn't as egregious, but he shouldn't be 5'9". He's probably a 7K receiver and should be priced above 7K for the rest of the season. So we can take advantage of that. I know Kansas State has a bit of a reputation for being a stingy or a pesky defense at times, but Luther Burden at 5'9", give me a break. I think Burden and Thrash are an excellent way to start your main lineup. Those 2 receivers at sub 6K price points, and they're going to combine for 30 plus fantasy points. Feel pretty confident in that. You look at the next closest in targets for Missouri, it's Theo Weiss. Yes, he's still in college with 9. So clearly they're funneling the ball to Burden. And he's literally about 2K underpriced. I wouldn't be surprised if he made it to 8K at some point. Even a quarterback that is as inconsistent as Brady Cook is finding the ways to get him the ball. And he's that type of receiver similar to Thrash where maybe you don't have to hit him, in the numbers, but get it like within a yard or 2 and maybe even 5, and he's going to make that grab. So got to love Luther Burden right here. And we're only like a quarter of the way through the slate, and I almost feel like I have my receiver spots locked and loaded. Do you agree on Burden or you kind of feel like, you're going to zag when everybody uses him? Because I assume he's going to be chalk as well.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that the price is too low. I think the volume will be there. I think that they'll manufacture touches for him. All those things that contribute to a receiver's floor are going to be there. Is there a weather concern in this game? Do you happen to know that?
I didn't see one as much like the BC with the hurricane. I didn't see it talked about as much on this one, but maybe I need to go back and
I only say that because there's worry there. Yeah, total seems awfully low for 47.5 for this being a competitive game, and Missouri can't really stop anybody, and I think can put up enough points to keep it competitive, and it's only a 4.5 point spread. So I would see this one going over 50 pretty easily. And so I was just wondering if I was maybe missing like there's some torrential downpour going to happen and the passing game gets shut out or something. But absent that, I think there's a pretty good offensive environment. And I think Burden is probably the main beneficiary of that, and could see some back and forth nature to this one.
All right, moving on to a game that you had DM'd me earlier, I think it was, and it's like, man, why'd they put this game and this game on the slate? And one of those was Weber State versus Utah, which we could have had the UNC versus Minnesota game, which is a similar time frame. I'm not sure why they wouldn't have, but instead we get Weber State and Utah, which would actually be a fine college basketball game, believe it or not. But I'm not so sure about college football. So what are your thoughts on a game like this? And kind of feels like a throwaway game, right?
It is kind of a throwaway game. I mean, I wasn't able to find a reliable spread on it. If I had to put a spread on it, I would say it's probably like 33 or something with like a 47 total. It just not super interesting from a DFS perspective. If we knew that like Jaquindon Jackson was 100% healthy and going to get 22 touches, and they were just going to run him into the ground probably throughout the first half, I would have a little bit of interest at 6,700. We do know Mekhi Bernard's out, and we know that it's probably Jalen Glover that gets whatever excess touches don't go to Jaquindon Jackson. But then it's going to be like, okay, well, they're also going to throw touchdown passes to 73 tight ends that we've never heard of or seen. So it's tough to get super excited about the very much unconcentrated Utah offense in a scenario like this, where they're pretty much going to be able to do whatever it is they want to do. And then I'm obviously not interested at all in anybody from the Weber State side. So unless you're super passionate about Jaquindon Jackson exposure, I think we probably move on to the next one.
Yeah, no, I try to find somebody from those littler, smaller teams, less exciting teams, but no, not on Weber State. And I think the rolling theme of this season, whenever Utah's on the slate for me, is I'm going to look for ways not to use them. For me, I think Jaquindon Jackson is going to end up, because of, Bernard, out, injury status out. Oh, he had such a good game last game. He had 18 fantasy points. That's fine. He ran for over 100 yards. Didn't score. I think his ownership is going to be a bit inflated, which worries me. I don't particularly like a chalk Utah running back, which 2 to 3 years ago I would have been fine with. But yeah, I'm not on board with Jackson. I think that's going to be one of my bigger line in the sand. Like, I'm not playing him while everyone does. If he would have been 5'5", I would have been like, shoot, they're putting me to the test. But at 6'7", we're getting into near 7K range. I'd rather play Marks. I'd rather go up and find Allen. It's not for me. So I'm going to move off of that and hope that chalk doesn't hurt me, because I think he'll see like 30%.
What's Tavion Thomas up to? Can we get him back on the slate?
Right? Jeez, yeah. And even the last like half year of his career was wonky there. I don't know what's going on with Utah. Obviously, Brant Kuthi, a healthy Brant Kuthi would be the only like interesting piece. And even then, I'm not feeling it. So I'm off of it as well. Moving on to Northwestern versus Duke. This one I have interest in. It is an 18.5 point spread, which probably accurate. I think this is one that has a chance to be a little bit higher scoring, though. Much like that Missouri game, much like the Penn State game. Like, there's a few games on here that I just feel like are going to go over 50. This one I saw a total of 48.5, so close enough, I suppose. But Northwestern right now, they're just not looking like a team that's going to play with much passion. Everything that's going through that program, they're, obviously this is going to be probably a wasted year, but they're not even like really playing with, and I hate to call out a team's, passion and their ability to, play confident or come up for a game. But man, the first couple of games, they just look so awful. Ben Bryant has not had any protection. The offensive line has been gross, terrible. Ben Bryant has like 3 seconds to throw the ball, and that might even be a little bit too much for what they're actually giving him. So it's tough to really use him. He's been banged up, but he is supposedly going to play, which is good because he is the best quarterback on their roster. And when he's protected, he can have some decent games we've seen in the past. Cam Porter did look better last week, 17 carries for 90 yards. Was awful in week 1 against Rutgers. Again, the O-line not protecting. He does have 6 catches through the first 2 weeks as well. So he does have some upside there for being a pass catcher. Sub 5K, so he is a cheaper running back that you can use because he is going to get the snaps. Duke's defense has been pretty solid so far. They did give up 114 yards to Will Shipley in week 1 while they completely shut down their passing game. Not suggesting Cam Porter as Will Shipley, but they do have similarities with the way that they can pass or what they can catch the ball. And they can also, get those short little runs, 2-3 yards, rack those up over time. So I don't mind Cam Porter there if you want to look to somebody. Really like the Northwestern receiving game, and that should be no surprise to anyone who's watched the show at all over the last couple of years. Seems to be one of those teams that I just kind of gravitate towards, and I'm not sure why. Although this year I might have a better reason or a better case to make. Cam Johnson has 13 targets through the first couple games, 6 catches for 89 yards. He's playing a ton of snaps. Over 70% of the snaps so far. They have him out there. They got him in from, ASU, Vanderbilt's got all this experience. Clearly, they're going to use him. Bryce Kurtz, who missed his first game, I believe it was, had 3 catches for just 17 yards, but he was targeted 5 times in that second game. And then you have AJ Henning, who unfortunately comes in priced closer to 5K instead of nearly min price, because I think it would have been a whole hell of a lot better of an option to use. 6 catches for 58 yards, 11 targets so far. He has rushed 6 times for 36 yards, and he scored a rushing touchdowns last week. So clearly they're going to get him the ball, maybe a little bit of Juice Williams light there. When he was at Michigan, they used him as a kick returner, punt returner. They did give him carries. He's just a versatile weapon that can be used in a variety of ways. And I would have loved to have seen him go to a team with a viable offensive line and quarterback combination, because I think he could put up some really big numbers and people would be really shocked just how good this kid is. After he got a scholarship to Michigan, and they churn out NFL caliber players all the time. So this kid can play. It's just a matter of this Northwestern team being very listless and tough to really watch or stomach. So rostering them is going to be a tough case, and I know that. So I'm not going to sit here and try to talk anyone into that. But I do think AJ Henning, even at 4.9, which, like I said, feels a little bit higher. I would have loved to get him in there at like 3.5 and really kind of solidify that. But I think he'll get enough touches. He plays enough snaps that he's going to be viable. I do think we see a little bit of ownership on Cam Johnson because he's at that 4.4 cheaper price. And we know he's going to get targeted a lot more. It's just that Hennings has an opportunity to maybe score a rushing touchdown, maybe a couple of receptions here. He can definitely pay off that 5K price. And we know Duke's going to probably get up on them 14 to 20 points. So Northwestern's going to have to definitely get something going in the passing game if they can ever get protection. So Henning at 4.9, it's not the main team call that people would probably be looking for from me, but he's absolutely in the player pool. Cam Johnson at 4.4 and Bryce Hurts at 4.1, maybe a little bit more of a wise play if you're going with Northwestern, but otherwise probably not your best situation. I got to say on the Duke side though, we've kind of come to this point with Riley Leonard where he's just a fantastic play regardless of price or matchup. Has that dual threat upside. He's only 6'7". We saw Wimsatt for Rutgers in week 1. He didn't put up huge numbers, but Rutgers play calling is kind of horrible. He was getting like chunk yardage when plays broke down. He had all the time in the world to throw against Northwestern. He was just befuddling their defenders left and right. So Riley Leonard has a chance to possibly put up 100 plus rushing yards and maybe even 250 plus passing yards. So looking at some of his combo props, because I'm going to be on them for sure. So at 6'7", Riley Leonard, this isn't going to be the 4 running back slate that last week was. We're jumping back to 2 quarterbacks because of Riley Leonard being at 6'7". That just sticks out like a sore thumb to me. So I'll have a lot of exposure there. Running backs wise for Duke, Jalen Coleman is getting closer to returning. Didn't see a definitive answer there. Once he does, it muddies the waters even further. Right now, Jordan Waters and Ja'Kaz Moore are splitting the carries, and both are putting up good numbers, which I think may tempt people into possibly using them, which is fine. But I'm probably looking at Riley Leonard and one of his receivers or nothing at all. Like, I don't think I want to pay 5.7 for Waters and then watch Ja'Kaz Moore score twice. And if Jalen Coleman were to play at 3.5, people might be tempted, but at the end of the day, they're just going to all share carries. Plus, when you get into the red zone goal line area, Riley Leonard's going to call his own number. So the Duke guys, even though Northwestern's rush defense and defense in general is just horrible, I'm not looking at the running backs. Wide receivers, Jalen Calhoun, another guy in that 5 to 6K bucket price range, which has a lot of zip. Calhoun at 5.4, I think is main team viable if you want to go there. If you have the salary, 14 targets, which leads the team, 9 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Hasn't really had a big breakout game, but he's consistently being targeted by Leonard. You have Jordan Moore there with 8 targets, 7 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown. And then a cheapie in Samar Higgins, who has 6 catches on 7 targets for 64 yards. He was kind of that separation play for us a week or two ago on the showdown slate. He's only 3.5. I kind of like him. If you get to a point where you need a salary saver, somebody that's going to be like, super low owned, maybe the masses aren't really looking at, I think Higgins at 3.5 could actually be a separator for you and a main team viable guy that maybe scores like 12 to 15 fantasy points this week. That's an aggressive number, but I could see him catching a touchdown and 5 for 75 in a score at 3.5. Absolutely a main team optimal play while the rest of the people are looking at Jalen Calhoun. So Riley Leonard and one of his receivers is how I'll be playing the game, and I'll have to really talk myself out of using a AJ Henning in my main lineup. I'll have to get him in alt lineup just so I can satiate, that need to play an off-the-wall receiver. But that's where my head is at for this game. Would you like to move on to the next one here, or do you have any thoughts additionally about this one?
I do not feel as strongly about AJ Henning as you do once again, but look, man, that's what the brand is about. You've got your guy, and I do think the volume will be there. I'm so down on this Northwestern offense. It's hard for me to get behind it, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, moving on to another game that just, the Maction, we're going to be having some weekday Maction slates, and they're going to put up a lot of points. But if this is your first year playing college football, you're probably going to have this weird thought of the MAC teams. Just like, man, these teams suck. But they're having to play a rough schedule. They all scheduled tough. When they play each other, there's going to be fireworks. So just bear with us for a few more weeks here. But Central Michigan versus Notre Dame on the slate here. This is another one that we probably could have done without. Notre Dame, I saw, was an almost 31-point favorite. We do have a 52.5-point spread. The name of the game here with the blowout, is there anybody on Notre Dame main team viable, or do we have to worry about them all getting pulled?
Yeah, and I mean, even when they don't get pulled, it's just, whack-a-mole with which receiver is going to end up with a ridiculous day. And so I'm all about trying to get enough lineups in there so that you have exposure to the correct receiver in a 3-receiver set. But there's 7 guys on Notre Dame that could realistically have 100 yards and a touchdown. And that's, I mean, one of them breaks an 80-yard run and scores at the end of it. He catches 2 more passes. He's there. Right. And so predicting which guy that is, especially at the price points that they're at, we were, or at least I was convinced enough that there would be Jaden Thomas volume to be pretty interested in Jaden Thomas last weekend and bageled, right? And so it was Holden Stace that took all the glory, and now he's up at 5-1. And then the 0-week breakout guy, Jaden Greathouse, has, or I guess not 0 week, but week 1, Jaden Greathouse with his 2 touchdown game. 2 of his 3 catches were touchdowns, and then followed it up with another against NC State. So I mean, maybe we think that there's just enough chemistry with Hartman and Greathouse that continues, but that's really thin. And he's only 4K, but it's a super thin play. He could easily bagel if he doesn't get involved early. And then in the running game, they're pumping volume through Estime, and so I'm pretty interested. Yeah, the 7-8 price is pretty high, and they do spread the volume out throughout the passing game. And I would imagine Notre Dame's going to score at least once on defense or special teams in this one. And so you're going to really hope that those touchdowns come early, but there's also the chance that, he breaks one for 70 on one drive and breaks another one for 85 the next. And now the guy's well over 100 yards and has 2 touchdowns. And all of a sudden 7-8 is, pretty easy price for him to exceed if he gets 7 or 8 more carries. So, definitely has the opportunity if the volume is there they haven't been like turning it over to another volume back as much. It's more just been the alternative to a volume back is getting Sam Hartman a lot of volume throwing the ball and, short, easy passes. And so I think the guy I'd be most confident in their floor is Estime, just because I think that combination of efficiency and enough volume will be there. But the receivers, pass catchers, man, like it's such a wild card as to who's the guy that's going to go off this particular week, that I think I'm probably off all of them, even though I know one or two of them will have a pretty good game.
Yeah, and I mean, you at this point with Notre Dame, we if you're using them receivers, you're playing like 5, 10, plus lineups. There's just no way to use any of these guys in your main. I thought, because all the preseason stuff and off practice reports, that Tobias Merriweather was going to be like this next great Notre Dame receiver, and he was just a total no-show in week one. He did have a 46-yard catch last week, but no volume to speak of. You mentioned Holden Stays had that breakout game. He's very easily could just disappear this week. Jaden Thomas, was there. Greathouse has amazing touchdown equity, I guess. But there's just no rhyme or reason there. And it's just a total crapshoot, like you said. The running game for Notre Dame is strong as usual. Audric Estime at 7-8. I think I could get behind using that. All of his backups, like if you could, like I would have been like, hey, 3-2 Jadarian Price, like let's go. They have him priced at 5-2. They've got Payne at 6-2. So they did a good job pricing pretty much everyone in the Notre Dame backfield out. If you go Audric, you can do it. There's enough cheap, semi values, I guess. Not as many cheap guys as last week, but you can make a really solid balance build, or you can get Audric in there and sacrifice 1 to 2 of those, mid 5K prices to make it happen, because he's probably going to score, like you said. And there's going to be a game where Hartman becomes like, Wake Forest version of himself. So we'll try to predict that as well, but we're not there yet with him. When we get to max slates, Bert Emanuel is going to be like the show, but
yes,
we're probably going to get stuffed in a locker here, but just want to put that name out there into the universe so people are ready for that when we get to max slates.
Yeah.
All right, moving on here to the next game where we're whipping through them a little bit faster. San Diego State versus Oregon State. The Aztecs are really Jalen Maiden or bust. Their running game, which I felt pretty positive about heading into the season, especially with Kristan. They're just super flat. The touches are spread out. Nobody's winning the job. Not the best environment here. Oregon State's defense is much better than people realize. I think people are actually starting to realize it. So really, there's nobody on the Aztec side that I'm looking at. So we'll throw that out the way right away. On the Oregon State side, we got a very spendy DJ, Ukulele at one of the more expensive options, but I don't think it's horrible to use him. Maybe we don't put him in our main lineup, but I think I'm getting to the point where I'm immediately feeling good about him in this offense. And I know it's still early, but maybe like large field GPPs, or maybe you throw him into a 3 entry max. He's got that dual threat upside. He has 8 touchdowns so far, 5 passing, 3 rushing. His passes are crisp. Anthony Gould is supposedly going to, his WR1 supposedly going to be back. He's probable at least. The running game obviously is strong. DJ has the benefit of having a just all-world guy in Damian Martinez. A year or two ago, we kind of saw it coming, like, hey, this kid's going to be the shit, right? And now he's getting all this work, 40% of the carries, and he's just completely smashing. Only 1 touchdown so far. More will come. 250 yards on the ground through 2 games. They are giving Deshaun Fenwick a good amount of work, but there's been some maybe not competitive situations, which has led to Fenwick playing more. He has 103 yards and a touchdown, but Dame is the guy. So I love him. The defense has to pay so much attention to Martinez. It's going to allow DJ these opportunities and more time to throw the ball and possibly run himself. So he's a nice look at large field, because I do think he could be a top 3, top 5 scorer on this slate, especially in a game like this where maybe the Aztecs hang around for a little bit before eventually falling in the second half. I think that's how this is going to play out. As far as the receivers go, I mentioned Gould, who missed last week. The WR1 in this offense, though, for sure. Silas Bolden has been really good, leads the team with 12 targets. He's caught 10 of those for 118 and a score. And then you have Zach Card with 9 targets, and their tight end, Jack Veiling, with 6. So a myriad of options there for DJ if you're looking for that GP pair. Gould makes the most logical sense, but Silas Bolden is getting a lot of volume in this offense and somebody that DJ clearly likes. Otherwise, we zero in on Damian Martinez, who I think missed his rushing prop on PrizePicks and DK by like a yard and a half. He had 103 yards in the first 2 drives, and we're like, well, that's nice before he gets pulled. And then he ended up playing one more drive, got a yard, and then they pulled him. So that was the risk I knew would happen there, but I still think it was the right move. And he's going to definitely be in a situation here against the Aztecs where he's going to be able to run all over them. At least volume-wise, you see 7 carries for 104 last week, but he had 18 for 146 the week before. Only 6'4". He's another guy that needs to be priced above 7K sooner rather than later. And until he gets priced appropriately, you can expect a whole hell of a lot of ownership on him. That also makes me like the DJ play more because in some of your alt builds, you can fade Dame. Maybe he gets the 100-plus yards, but it's DJ that scores the rushing touchdown or he throws 4 touchdowns. You're going to have some nice leverage opportunity there if Dame doesn't score. So in your main lineup, though, you're looking at Damian Martinez for sure, and this is probably the last time he's under 7K, at least for maybe one more week. After that, he's not going to be this cheap ever again, I don't think. All right, we can move on to the next one unless you have thoughts there. Don't want to skip out on you, but we're cruising right along.
Yeah, I think just reiterate that he was pulled kind of midway through the second quarter. Martinez was, and so bummer for our PrizePicks for sure, but also don't think that lack of volume was like a coaching decision or something. It was very much they were up early, and in what I think will be at least a marginally more competitive game, I think he gets closer to 18 to 20 touches and should have a much better opportunity to put up high volume numbers.
Yeah, and the Oregon State O-line is solid, so his kid's just awesome. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Alabama on the slate. I'm always kind of indifferent to Bama on the slate. I know the masses kind of flock to them, but they've lost a little luster over the last maybe season and a half. Playing against South Florida, 33-point favorites, a 61 total over on DraftKings, quite high there at least. What's up with the Alabama game against South Florida? Are they going to get ripped, or is this one going to be a little bit better on DFS side?
I mean, a Nick Saban team coming off a loss against South Florida. I think so. Yes, I think this is going to be a blowout for Alabama, but I don't necessarily think that means that they're going to take their foot off the gas as much as other teams in a similar spot might, just because that anger is going to be unleashed a little bit. Right. And so they're going to want to get, back in the style points conversation and get back to, we're Alabama and we beat teams like this by 50. Right. And so I think the starters tend to play a little bit longer than they otherwise would. Had they beat Texas by 20 and they're still riding high, I think you'd see starters getting pulled early. But I think we're going to see Alabama starters a lot from here on out after a Nick Saban team loses. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we can confidently play a 7-1 Jermaine Burton or a 6-2 Isaiah Bond or cough up, a ton for Jaden Milroe? I don't know, man. It's tough. There does seem like there's going to be some weather. I would say they probably get this one done more on the ground than they do through the air. Just looking at all of those factors. And then, do we think that the beneficiary is Jace McClellan, who's been pretty damn ineffective so far? Or do we think that they say, hey, you didn't get it done so far, so we're gonna turn it over to Roydell Williams, see what he can do? It's an interesting spot because I do think they are going to score a lot of points. There's not a high degree of confidence, at least from me, as to whom those points are going to come from, and that makes things pretty sticky from a DFS perspective. I think it's a little bit of a cop out, but I think I would probably just feel safest saying, they're going to let Jalen Milroe build his confidence back up and sling the ball around and maybe run it a little bit. And maybe he gets in the end zone a time or two. And it looks more like his week 1 game against Middle Tennessee. So that, that's the memory that he has going forward, going into conference play. But at 9-1, so it's a lot to ask from a guy on a 33-point spread, right? So as much as I do think this will be a traditional Alabama beatdown, it's hard for me to get to any of those pieces individually. And I also think that the defense is going to come out angry and probably cause some turnovers and score some points. I don't know that I'm looking to get a whole lot of Byron Brown, even though he's only at 6'4". I think this is going to just be like a 40-13 kind of Alabama game, but the touches are spread out enough that there's not any one massive DFS superstar that comes out of it.
Yeah, and this is one I'm hoping, again, Alabama, usually like if people are playing CFB, like maybe they got a little bit of NFL DFS money, they want to try this out, they'll think, oh, Alabama, and use them. But I think, the prices, like you mentioned, are high enough on those receivers where they can do a lot of damage to your lineup if they don't pan out. Like Burton at 7-1, if he doesn't catch a score or hit 100 plus, like that can do a lot of damage because we have all these like 5 to 6K receivers that are probably going to outscore him, honestly. And that's just going to put you far behind. So I would say the tough decision, at least in my mind, is, playing Jace McClellan at 6'3". It's a great price for him potentially if he scores twice, puts up 100 yards. But we haven't really seen that from him. He hasn't looked explosive. It's not like Jam Miller has looked any better. Roydell Williams has been okay. It's just there's been a lot of early season ineffectiveness in that running game. I do think McClellan will end up being okay, but it also wouldn't surprise me if he gets usurped in the pecking order by Roydell or Jam Miller, who I do think has talent. But none of them are super cheap. When you look at McClellan, his price seems cheap at 6'3", but Roydell at 5'8", Jam at 5'4". You really have to have some either insider info or have a really good read on Alabama before playing any of those guys. So I will look to probably fade as well and hope that people just jam it in into their lineups or chase the, Brown at 6'4", his performance. He's crushed it. Maybe people go box score shopping, see that he's, crushed it without looking at who the opponents are. And let people kind of fall into that trap, because as good as he has been, this is a spot that I would say no thank you. So that's usually where I feel about Alabama games. So it's nothing new for me at all. All right, South Carolina versus Georgia, a 27.5-point spread. Georgia, looking at it, so far they've been a completely different team, and obviously early, and they're still running the ball with a little bit of success, but the offense in the first 2 weeks, even, against maybe weaker opponents, especially in week 1, has been stagnant. It's taken them some time to get going. They got going, but the first quarter, it was like, wow, it's 3-0, or, hey, it's 7-3. They're losing. Like, obviously they're going to win this game, but what the hell's going on? Carson Beck has been chucking it. He's thrown for at least 30 passing attempts in the first 2 games. Usually for me, I'm used to seeing them as a running team. So allowing Beck to sling it's kind of interesting, makes him an intriguing option to a degree. He has almost 600 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 passing and 1 rushing so far. So he's definitely, I think, in the mix here against the South Carolina team. 8-4, maybe not the most, economical price, but it's also not egregious, especially if he's going to throw 30 plus times. He has nice weapons. The running game itself with Kendall Milton and Roderick Robinson, those seem to be the 2 guys so far. Milton 16 carries, Robinson 14. Both have scored at least 1 touchdown, neither over 100 yards yet. So I'm a little bit indifferent there. I think they're fine options, but if you're getting to Georgia and you're not worried about the blowout factor, I think you can go ahead and play a guy like Beck and some of his receivers, or just play one of those receivers. And I do think, Brock Bowers, when the slate first came out, he was 3K. I posted it on Twitter like, oh, this can't happen. Like, it's Monday, go ahead and let's re-release this slate, because this is just going to be dumb. They did re-release the slate, not because I asked them to, but at least they did. And he came back at 4.7. So it's an improvement from 3K, but it's not enough to keep him from being super chalky. I will say, as much, and I'm, a card carrying member, maybe even president of the Brock Bowers fan club for, 2 seasons now. But I don't know that he's a stone cold lock just yet, even at that price. And I think this is going to be another one of those, decision points for me where I'm going to be up until the last, minute, be like, man, do I use him? He has been targeted 8 times so far, so that's fine. 6 catches for 84 yards. Hasn't had that really breakout Brock Bowers level game yet. We haven't seen the big play just yet. It's early, of course. He's absolutely in play, but I don't know. He just doesn't have the chemistry yet with Beck that we've seen in years past. Not that he won't start going crazy and knowing that he's going to be like 35, 40% owned. It's a tough place to try to get away from. Lad McConkey's still not practicing. He was also 3K on that slate they were going to release. Not that he's going to play, but whatever. Dom Lovett has lead the team in targets with 10, transferred over from Missouri. 7 catches for 54 yards. Nobody really individually for Georgia has stepped up and looked all that great yet, but Beck is getting a lot of volume. He's kind of spreading the love around to the various targets that he does have. So it's a tough situation because I'm probably not going to use Beck, but I do think they'll score some points. Like I said, this offense has been a little stagnant. It's a nice little spot against South Carolina in which I think they'll get paced up a bit, and they're definitely going to be looking to score, maybe kind of flex their muscles a little bit and remind people who they are. On the South Carolina side, you have Spencer Rattler, who has been slinging it himself, 700 yards in the first couple games, 3 touchdowns. He's got a myriad of weapons around him as well. I think South Carolina is going to definitely be fun this year. Going against the Georgia defense, not really the most ideal situation. So I won't look at Juju McDowell or Dak Joyner. They're also kind of sharing carrier duties, right? Joyner to me has looked a little bit better. I'm just not chomping at the bit to play either of them. As far as receivers go, another juice on the slate. Mentioned that earlier, Antoine Juice Wells. He's a full go after missing some time. I would expect him in a positive game script like this to be absolutely peppered with targets. He's only 5'5", so again, harping on it, but really driving it home. 5K to 6K receiver spots are loaded. You can fit 3 guys, maybe even you play them in the flex, 4 guys in your lineup under 6K that could potentially break the slate. I feel that confident about Wells, at least his targets. Don't know if those are going to translate to touchdowns or 100+ yards, but he's going to be peppered. It helps also that Xavier Leggett has been just outstanding. 17 targets so far, obviously benefited from Wells being hurt. 15 catches, 300 yards, and a touchdown. His rapport with Rattler is phenomenal. He's also played over 62% of the snaps so far, so he is all over the field. Amarian Brown, who has been targeted 11 times, is questionable, so he may not play. And if he misses, that's more work for Leggett, and Wells obviously coming in there to take that work. A possible bump for a somewhat familiar name in Eddie Lewis, who's been from Memphis, who possibly could be like a GPP look there, but somebody who I would expect to get some more targets. I don't want to fully ignore the South Carolina offense because I do think they're going to be chucking it. And Wells is the guy I'm kind of zeroing in on, but I just got burnt. Actually, I got burnt with Wells in week 1 on a secondary slate, and then I turned around and got burnt by Allie Jennings and Virginia Tech last main slate. So I'm really being, cautious with some of these injury history or banged up receivers. So they just can't afford to take these bagels here on these early slates because of all the missed prices and slate breakers. You just fall way too far behind. Obviously, I can't control it, but I want to at least be smart with it with who I'm putting in my main lineup. So I do think Juice Wells will see ownership. I don't think he'll be one of the highest owned, just the reason of, Leggett's busted out. Juice has been injured, but I certainly want to have some exposure even against a team like Georgia. So this is one I won't be betting either. I've had questions offline from other people about if I want to take the Georgia spread. I don't. I don't feel confident in one way or another because I think South Carolina will score points, and I'm just not sure what to think about this Georgia offense under Beck just yet. Where are you at with Spencer Rattler, by the way? I know we were kind of like the only ones a year or two ago, like we're not playing him, but I don't know. I feel myself warming back up to him.
Not the week for it, but I think, he can be interesting in games where he's going to have time to operate and not be flushed out of the pocket a bunch and, not be rattled, to use that pun. I think that we can use him on slates for sure, but against the Georgia defense is not the spot for me.
For sure. All right, moving on to the last couple games here. We have Western Kentucky versus Ohio State. It's no mistake. I usually give Ohio State game to Jake. He breaks it down very well. -29, 64 total, one of the higher totals on here. Ohio State, that's another team for me, not to the level of Alabama where it's like we know where the targets are going to come. But offense, it did break out a little bit. But I don't know. I haven't been quite as excited about them that I find myself usually being. And I know it's super early in the year, but what can we expect from Ohio State in a game like this?
So yeah, I mean that hits the nail on the head. So each of the first two games, there had been the quarterback controversy. Is it going to be McCord? Is it going to be Brown? Is Brown going to be mixing in a little bit here and there, even though McCord is mainly the guy? And Ryan Day finally put a stop to that and said, Kyle McCord's our guy. And so I feel similarly. To the Tanner Mordecai thing where, and that's why I referenced McCord earlier, like he kind of started to put it together and then the game got out of control and he didn't have to keep doing everything. But the difference is in this one, and I think this spread is a little bit too much. I think that, Western Kentucky, if Malachi Corley is actually healthy and able to go in this one and be a full go, I think this game remains kind of competitive. And like Malachi Corley is by far the best play on the slate. If he's truly a full go. That said, like the Ohio State offense needs to start clicking. They force-fed Harrison last week against Youngstown State of all teams, and he responded 7-160 and 2. Like 7-160 and 2 is a good DFS day, regardless of what your price is. Even though he's the only receiver over, I'm sure he's the only receiver over 9. Is he also the only receiver over 8? Probably. Yeah, by a good margin, right? So, other than Igbuka, who's the other receiver on Ohio State. So like this is definitely an opportunity for McCord to build on last week. Yes, it's still against a vastly inferior opponent. So, there might be the tendency to take the foot off the gas, but at the same time, when you go into the mentality of, hey, like we're really trying to build this guy's confidence. We just named him the full-time starter. We gave him the job. He is the guy. Like, I think he'll probably get a third quarter at least, right? Like with them still kind of throwing it a little bit in that third quarter. And when it's Marvin Harrison that you're throwing it to and Igbuka, not to take anything away from him, fantastic, receiver in his own right. And he'll have a red zone presence too. They're insanely expensive. Right. And so like, you're not going to get to the McCord who's at 94, Harrison who's at 91, and Igbuka at 7,800. Like you're not going to do that in one lineup. It is just, unless you find a bunch of 3 and 4K receivers and running backs to fill in your other spots, you're going to be in a really tough place if you do that. But Malachi Corley on the other side is an amazing play to have at 4.7. It's ridiculous. And yes, he's coming off of injury. Like he didn't play in the last game. He came up limping, halfway through the game against USF, and I think he came a little bit short of his PrizePick number. I think he got me on that one because that was somebody I was interested in. He came out guns blazing, the Malachi Corley that we know and love, and then got hurt and wasn't able to finish the game. And so you have not seen a big stat line from him yet. And if he is truly healthy, you will see one in this game. He's too good to not see a ton of production from the volume that he'll be getting. Yes, he'll also get a lot of defensive attention, but Western Kentucky schemes well. They'll scheme him open. They'll scheme him, short touches to give him all that yak. And they just throw the ball a lot in general, and they'll have the ball a lot in general because Ohio State's going to score pretty quickly. So I think Corley is pretty close to becoming like the guy for me on this slate. And it's weird in an Ohio State game to be super excited about the guy on the other side usually you're pretty excited about one of the quarterback, whether that was, Stroud or Fields in years past, and one of his receivers, whether that was Garrett Wilson or Olave, or now with Harrison and Igbuka. Usually that's what you're excited about, but I think the run back guy is the guy that we want, because so few, at least I think relative to the slate, so few people will be on him because he hasn't been explosive yet this year. And then Austin Reed, man, like that's pretty disrespectful price. Like I get you're going into the horseshoe, but guys put up 30 plus DK points in 2 in a row. And I get that it's against USF and Houston Christian. But it doesn't mean that he's bad. He shouldn't be penalized for that. He's been surgical, 80%, passer, and put up 4 touchdowns last week. Like the talent is there, and he did that without Corley. So add Corley back into the mix, and like it's really tough for me to get away from a Reed Corley pairing at less than 10K total. Like that's, or right around 10K total. That's pretty nuts. And so I like that side of it even more than I like the Ohio State side of it, just because of the pricing. But that is not to say that you shouldn't get Ohio State exposure. You absolutely should. I think this will be a 300-yard affair for McCord, and he hasn't done that yet. This will be a 4-touchdown game for McCord, and he hasn't done that yet. And so, yes, he's 9.4, and he might need to do a little bit better than just 304, but I think that's a pretty good floor to have. And then to have the quarterback on the other side of it be so cheap, as well as having a pairing cheap receiver to pair him with, I think there's a lot of opportunity for fantasy goodness in this game. Whereas I think that the other blowouts don't set up quite as well, because there isn't quite as much concentration of fantasy points. They're kind of more evenly distributed.
Yeah, man, this is too cheap for this Western Kentucky offense, and I know that it's not the same level of Tecmo Bowl that it was in years past, but man, 5.5 and 4.7 for their top 2 options. I came into this slate and tonight's show like, I don't want to talk about Austin Reed being not a core play, but a main team viable quarterback. But geez, I mean, what does he actually have to do at 5.5, right? Like throw a couple touchdown passes and 250. He'll probably get picked off a few times, but man,
it kind of feels like how we felt about Cam Ward before Cam Ward was good, right? Like,
yeah,
like there's just that price. It leaves him so much meat on the bone to have a decent game and far exceed that price point.
Yeah, and it's later, so Corley, it should be good to go, like you said. But even if he's not, like he showed with Easton Messer last week, like he'll still have our targets that he can throw the football to. But man, that's gonna be tough. That's gonna be another one that I have to really consider. Because for the Ohio State side, you mentioned like there's just way too much cheap receivers. Like Marvin Harrison becomes such an ultimate GPP play for this slate, because I don't know that anyone's really going to want to pay the 9.1 for him. Yeah, he could break it, but there's just so many guys who percentage-wise could have a higher value marker at 5K, 4.7, 4.8, 5.1. So it's tough, but man, he's a big-time slate breaker, so I like it for GPPs. But yeah, that WKU one, that's a decision that's going to haunt me for the rest of the next 2 nights. All right, last game on the slate here, Tulane versus Southern Miss. Now, Tulane's right around a 12.5, 13-point favorite. Makes sense if Pratt plays. We had the injury drama last week, and it's one of the last games on the slate later, and so we're not going to have that information until much closer to lock for that game, as he does have the dreaded game time decision designation. If Pratt were to play, I absolutely have interest here against Southern Miss. I think he, depending on how injured he still is, which, man, all week they were saying that wasn't a problem. And of course, wake up Saturday morning, it's now a problem. So we'll see if it goes reverse this time, and maybe it won't be a problem and we'll get some news. But Pratt, of course, can't be used in Maine because we won't have the information yet. GPP or afternoon slate, absolutely. And if you can't go, Kai Horton, who did enough last week, isn't worth playing. The running back situation for Tulane, at least for now, seems to have worked itself out without Pratt, perhaps. I don't know if it gets more clouded with him back, but Mekhi Hughes, 23 carries last week. Now, he got to 92 yards against Ole Miss, but 23 carries, certainly looking like he's going to be the RB1 now, which makes Clayton Johnson, Sully Steen, and Lewis kind of an afterthought at this moment, especially when you combine both games and you get to a 45% carry share for Hughes. So I think, and again, we're going to have to kind of monitor, but I think he might become main team viable there. You look at his price, it's only 4.6. That's kind of the price point where it's almost like, hell, I don't even care. Like, I'm just going to put him in there. If Pratt plays, then it's fine, whatever. If Lewis scores a touchdown, fine. 4.6, there's just, 23 carries is 23 carries. So I think either way, he's looking at the 15 plus touches in some form or fashion. So at 4.6 against a Southern Miss team that I don't think is going to defend them all that well, he has to be considered for your main lineup and kind of your take home play. Receivers wise, I know there was a lot of Chris Brazell talk last week. You and I both kind of were like more leaning on the Jackson Keys if we were going to go that route. I think, Brazell obviously victimized by having Horton as the quarterback might become relevant again with Pratt. We'll see. But as of this moment, if you're going to use a Tulane wide receiver, it's either Keys or Jackson. They're both above 6K though. And we've just gone through the slate and given you a ton of options under 6K. So it's really tough to get there. Keys has been targeted 15 times, Jackson 13. So clearly heavily involved in this Tulane offense. And they're good. Afternoon slate, I think I might be more interested, but on the main, I'm probably not getting there with them. Just looking at the Tulane running back, and maybe Hughes can turn into the next IJ Spears for us. It's a lot to ask for, but kind of played that way, at least with his touches last week. At the quarterback spot for USM, they have a kid by the name of Billy Wiles. He has thrown 62 times in the 2 games, barely completed 50% of those passes. They're not quality looks. He's kind of just throwing them in the air and hoping for the best. He's super cheap. You're looking for GPP looks and somebody who's going to pass the ball a lot. Maybe you can go there. Frank Gore Jr. is still on the team. Now, he's 2 years removed from being like just a lock and load for me. He used to play Wildcat. He would be quarterbacking a little bit, big time receiver, getting all the carries. And now that's really not happening. He's not the quarterback anymore. He's not, he's still getting targeted as a pass catcher. So he has that going for him. But he was also out touched last game by a Memphis transfer and Jake Kuchak brand favorite, whose name has not been said around these parts for a year, in Rodriguez Clark, who did not play last year, but he's back. And he was pretty damn good last week. Through the 2 games, regardless of game script, he has 140 yards on 24 carries, YPC just under 6. Now, you might remember in 2021 and 2022, he rushed for over 320 yards in each of those seasons in a somewhat crowded Memphis backfield. But he's just one of those like bowling ball-esque runners who can just, kind of chew up clock, keep Tulane off the field, and he can score if they get into the red zone area. So Clark's kind of interesting. You look at the price points on these guys. Like, I think people are going to look at it and be like, oh, Frank Gore, he's the guy. But if you really dig into it and see, he's kind of getting phased out a little bit. He's still getting touches, and he's the number 1 receiver out of the backfield. So he still has that going for him, but he's 5K. And I just don't know, with Clark there pilfering looks, it's kind of tough. Clark is 4-5. GPP worthy? I do think so. I could see him scoring 2 times here potentially. If we didn't have on the other side Hughes, I would maybe be banging the drum for Clark a little bit more for you, because I do think he's a good player and he deserves some looks, and he's clearly outplaying Frank Gore right now. When it's all said and done, still early in the year. The target leaders for USM, Tiaquel and Mims with 11, Jacarius Caston with 10, and then you have Frank Gore with 7. So still getting a little bit of work there in the passing game. But, man, Frank Gore's gone from a 7-5, kind of core lock to 5K, and now he's no longer playable. It's kind of crazy how life comes at you sometimes. But Rodriguez Clark, definitely a name to pay attention to. I think it's kind of an eye-opener to see that he out-touched Gore last week, and I think he will get a lot of work in this one. And I do think without Pratt, this game ends up being a single-digit affair, which could work to the benefit of Clark as a sneak play here, because their quarterback, really, he's more inaccurate than Plummer, if you can actually imagine that. That is the slate. Are you surprised to hear the name Rodriguez Clark? I mean, that's
Drake Clark, man. That's like, that conjures up, like, were he in like Kenneth Gainwell in the same backfield or something. Like
Yeah.
it is wild to see that name still being relevant to college fantasy football, man. But it's a heck of a call out. And yeah, he could be the dude. I think the thing to remember in this one, it is early in the season. Like, they played Florida State in their second game, and so like that's just going to be, you can't completely throw out the result, but you kind of gotta like not lend quite as much credibility to a Florida State result. And you're pretty tough on Billy Wiles there, but Billy Wiles could chuck when he was playing Alcorn. So this is like a little bit more of a middle of the road type game. I don't know that Tulane's necessarily got the same defense that Florida State does. So I could see, not that I'm going to get there, because any like 5K quarterback allotment is going to go to Austin Reed, but I could see Billy Wiles doing a little bit better than he did against Florida State. And with that being said, he targeted the heck out of Jacarius Caston so far, and actually did have some success in week one. Throwing to him, 104 and 1 is a pretty good line to put up in a game that ended up being a blowout and turned into, mainly a rushing game later on. So, I actually do have some interest in Jacarius Caston, probably even a little bit more than I do in Dreek, just because I think game script wise, they're going to be throwing a little bit more when this one starts to get out of hand. And it is a 13-point spread. Like, does that not seem to indicate that Pratt is probably good to go for this one? Or do you think it would be closer to like 18 or 19 if Pratt was locked in?
I thought for sure Pratt was not going to be out the way they talked all last week. So I honestly, I don't even have an inkling on that. You would think that he's going to play. Yes, I would imagine he's not going to sit, but I thought that last week too. So
yeah,
don't know.
Who knows?
Going back real quick to the 2019 season, this Memphis roster, just got to hear this real quick. Kenneth Gainwell, Patrick Taylor, Kylan Watkins, Brady White, Antonio Gibson, Calvin Austin, and Rodriguez Clark. So yes, since the 2019 season, the man's been playing around. And that roster, holy shit, how did that roster not do more damage? That is a very strong, potent group of players. All right, that finishes out the slate. What do you got for core? Let's get to the core plays here. We're making great time this week.
So yeah, I think core is probably going to be pretty different from most people. I'm going to go with Tanner Mordecai at quarterback. Probably pretty different there. Going to go a little bit more chalk at running back with Damian Martinez, and then going to go to Malachi Corley in the receiver slot.
Love it. So for me on DraftKings, I hate to be, he's probably going to be super popular, but Riley Leonard, at 6'7", I just don't know how to get away from that. Running back wise, there's a lot of quarterbacks I actually like this week, which is funny, but so I'm not going with the 4 running backs this time. There are definitely some good options. For me, it's going to be one of Katron Allen or Nick Singleton. As of this moment, it's Katron Allen as my behind Damian Martinez. I'm 100% agreement there. But by Saturday morning, I may be on Singleton. But one of those guys is going to be my second running back for sure. And then at wide receiver, Jamari Thrash. It's super chalky. I know I'm very chalky this week, but in the article and Saturday morning, I will unearth some other sneakier plays for you guys. On FanDuel, they have some additional games. They do kind of the longer thing where they meld some stuff together, but I don't know how I could possibly not play Michael Penix on any price, any site. It's 12-4 on FanDuel. He's going to throw 1,000,000 times, 300 plus yards. All this talk about, oh my God, they're going to Michigan State. The defense of the Spartans is so much improved. Like, they got turmoil. They got the coach trouble. No. Michael Penix is going to go into the Spartans' house and he's going to wreck them. So you got to play him. Running back on FanDuel, there's some cheapies for sure. I like the price you mentioned about Joe Marks. He's 8-9 over on FanDuel. I certainly like him there. I would call him a core play on FanDuel for me. And then at wide receiver, there are also a myriad of options. Roman Dunze is 10-1 there. It's kind of expensive for me. I think that you come down and look for, 2K cheaper Malik Neighbors, who's 8-1 on FanDuel. Not that I like him better than Rome by any means, but I would feel like he's a little bit more of a wiser play there on FanDuel, where pricing is a lot different. So I'll go with Neighbors as my core there. Moving on, we have PrizePicks. I will dial you up here. I'll get mine out of the way because I have a couple already ready. Katron Allen is going to be my anytime touchdown scorer, which we'll talk about some betting props here at the end before we leave. But Katron Allen over 0.5 rushing touchdowns. This is on PrizePicks. Will Howard over 2.5. They have pass rush plus receiving touchdowns. I don't know if he'll receive one, although he could. But over 2.5, he's going to score 3 touchdowns. I feel pretty confident in that one. And then Nick Singleton, I'm on this Penn State running back group, over 75.5 rushing yards. Those are the 3 that stick out to me the most, but there are plenty of others. What are some of the top PrizePicks options for you?
So I'm going to go with Thrash over 5.5 receptions. I don't think you said that one, right?
No.
And then we're going to go Marks. I don't know if he's getting 20 carries. I'm going over 69.5 yards. I think he'll probably get there. And then I will. Let's see. We'll go to the passing yards side of things, and we'll go with Tanner Mordecai. I guess sticking with the theme of coring Tanner Mordecai, we'll go Tanner Mordecai over 263.5 passing yards.
I like it, man. The Mordecai call could be nasty, and if it works out, you're gonna be having all the green screens. All right. So that about wraps it up. I do want to pull a couple of props from DraftKings here real quick, just looking to see any updated numbers. So it's going to be really hard to get the first week 0, like getting the odds of on anytime touchdown of plus 450 was nice. I don't think we're pretty confident I won't find one like that again. But I have the anytime touchdown on Katron Allen, which is minus 140, nowhere near as glamorous as plus 450, but it's there. And I feel pretty good about that one. And then let me just pull up the rushing yards. Just want to make sure. Sticking with that Singleton Allen theme, minus 115 for Singleton at over 72.5 rushing yards, and minus 125 for Katron Allen over 60.5. Also, if you like the Joe Marks call, he's 69.5 yards on DraftKings, minus 135 there, but you can put those together with another one for a parlay to get a little bit better. Yeah, that seems low. I think they're putting him more like he's sharing the backfield with Dylan Johnson still or someone else as a bell cow. That probably isn't going to be enough. So I like him hitting that over for sure. And that will wrap it up. So now we reach the time of the show where Jake takes us home with his line in the sand, stat line on a player. And you've talked so much about Mordecai and those WKU guys. Got to feel like maybe that's one of them. But who's our take-home player here in week 3?
We're going to go Mordecai 304.
All right, 304.
Mordecai for 304 at probably, I would say, less than 10% ownership.
Oh, yeah, definitely. If he does that and throws a couple touchdowns, you're going to be in great shape. Love it. Appreciate it. As always, thanks to all of you that tuned in live, and we'll be watching this show on demand. Be back Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock. And then again, of course, same time next week. Appreciate it. Take care, guys. See you later.